the heart of Renaissance Italy, where art and beauty flourished under shadows of corruption. A child was born into a dynasty that wielded both the sword and the cross. Her name was Lucrezia Borgia. History remembers her as a monster. But history often lies, especially when written by the powerful. She was the daughter of a man who would become pope. And in that sacred title, he found a mask for unspeakable sins. Raised not for love, but for leverage. Groomed not for faith, but for manipulation. What happens when the one meant to represent Christ uses the altar as a throne of lust, control, and betrayal? What happens when a daughter becomes a pawn? In a game where family means possession, and survival means silence, this is not a tale of myth or rumor. It is a documented descent, a tragic unraveling of innocence, in the hands of the most powerful church on earth. 500 years later, her name still echoes with dread and fascination, not because of what she did, but because of what was done to her. This is the true story of Lucrezia Borgia. The year was 1480. Rome, glittering, dangerous, and drowning in sin. This was no age of saints. It was an era where bishops sold salvation, and cardinals held mistresses as openly as they held mass. At the center of this world stood Rodrigo Borgia, a man of ambition wrapped in silk robes, bearing crosses while sharpening daggers. He wasn't just part of the corruption. He refined it, perfected it, weaponized it. Rodrigo fathered multiple children with his mistress, Venazia dei Catanii, and one of those children was Lucrezia. By the church's own laws, she should have been hidden in shame. But Rodrigo had different plans. Where others saw a bastard daughter, he saw opportunity. She would become a living treaty, a daughter transformed into diplomatic currency. This was no ordinary family. The Borgias didn't just navigate the filth of the Vatican. They owned it. Bribes secured positions. Murder silenced rivals. Even holiness itself became a market item. Bought, sold, and discarded. In the Papal States, power wasn't hidden in shadows. It wore crimson robes, sat on golden thrones, and spoke the language of heaven, while practicing the mechanics of hell. Rodrigo wasn't yet pope, but he was already spinning a web, binding his children into it strand by strand. Lucrezia never had a chance. From the very beginning, her path was chosen, not by God, but by a father who served himself. She was born into shadows, but raised beneath chandeliers. Lucrezia Borgia never had a childhood, only a role to prepare for. From the cradle, she wasn't treated as a daughter, but as a future instrument of strategy. A girl shaped not by dreams or affection, but by calculation. Other children learned prayers. She learned silence. Other girls embroidered linens. She was taught how to hold a room, how to flatter powerful men, how to smile when terrified. She was not hidden as illegitimate children usually were. Rodrigo Borgia placed her at the center of his plans. She would become the Borgia family's most valuable asset, a living, breathing alliance. Even her name could be traded. Her body, her presence, her future. Each part of her became currency. By age 10, she was betrothed to a nobleman she had never met. By 11, the match had changed. Not out of love, but politics. Every shift in alliance meant a shift in her fate, and she had no say in any of it. She lived surrounded by wealth, but had no ownership of her life. Lavish gowns, golden rings, but nothing was hers. She was being groomed, not for womanhood, but for utility. To survive in a world ruled by predators, she learned to smile through betrayal, to remain still while others decided her path. Innocence was not something she lost. It was something she was never allowed to have. By the time most girls her age were whispering about love, Lucrezia had already been told whom to marry, what to wear, and how to behave like a duchess. Before she even knew what the word meant, she wasn't just growing up. She was being prepared. Prepared to be used. Renaissance Rome dazzled the world, but beneath its marble beauty it stank of rot. The church, once a beacon of salvation, had become a marketplace for sin. Cardinals openly kept mistresses. Confessions were sold like indulgences. And inside the walls of the Vatican, holiness decayed into spectacle. The line between sacred and profane was erased. Masses were followed by murders. Papal chambers became stages for orgies. Holy offices were auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the people who ruled this empire of faith did so with poison in one hand and scripture in the other. The Vatican was no longer a sanctuary. It was a throne room of corruption. Even prayer had a price. In this world, the Borgia family thrived. They didn't just participate in the rot. They refined it into an art form. Rodrigo Borgia, not yet Pope, but already feared, used every tool available. Bribes, seductions, blackmail, even assassins cloaked as servants. This was the world Lucrezia entered. A world where trust was weakness, where beauty masked danger, where no sanctuary was safe. A German chronicler, Johann Burchard, eyewitness to the papal court, recorded one of its darkest events. The banquet of chestnuts. 50 courtesans naked crawled across the papal floor, collecting chestnuts, as churchmen watched, cheered, and judged their performance. It wasn't rumor. It was documented. This was her home. These were her teachers. Her education didn't begin with catechisms. It began with survival. Lucrezia was raised in a palace, where even the innocent were used as entertainment, where the very men who claimed to protect souls bartered bodies like coins. This wasn't myth. It was history, and it shaped everything she would become. Before she knew what marriage meant, Lucrezia Borgia was engaged, not once, but twice. Before the age of 11, her first betrothal came when she was barely 10. A Spanish nobleman, handpicked by her father for the strength of his alliances. There were no letters of affection, no tender meetings, only contracts, written by men in robes, sealed with wax, dripping with ambition. Then, the political winds shifted, and so did her fate. The engagement was dissolved, a new one arranged. Different man, different purpose, same girl, same silence. Each betrothal was not about love, but leverage. To the Borgia family, Lucrezia was not a daughter. She was a diplomatic chess piece, moved across maps and bloodlines to secure power. Other children played with dolls. She was being traded between kingdoms. These were not romantic stories. They were calculations. Each proposal a strategy. Each wedding dress, a political banner. No one asked what she wanted. No one needed to. Her value wasn't in her mind or heart, but in her name, her bloodline, her body. She was being shaped into something useful, beautiful, and entirely owned. In Renaissance Rome, a woman's worth was measured by what she could bring to the table, not what she dreamed, feared, or felt. Lucrezia learned this early. Her first role in life was to be offered. Her second was to accept it without protest. In 1492, Rodrigo Borgia became pope. He called it divine destiny. The world called it what it was, a purchase. He bought the papacy, not with prayer, but with gold, vast bribes, secret deals, promises traded like indulgences. And it worked. Rodrigo Borgia was crowned as Pope Alexander VI, the most openly corrupt pontiff ever to sit on the throne of St. Peter. For the world, it was a scandal. For Lucrezia, it was the beginning of her true ordeal. She was 12, and her father now held absolute power, political, spiritual, and personal. But power didn't refine him. It amplified him. The papal crown didn't elevate his soul. It gave him permission. He used the church to enrich his dynasty, appointing relatives, handing out favors, and silencing enemies. With divine authority, Lucrezia was now more valuable than ever. She became a centerpiece in the Borgia Empire's expansion. Her first marriage at age 13 was no family celebration. It was a political merger. She was married to Giovanni Sforza, a nobleman whose name brought military advantage. The wedding took place in the Vatican itself. Witnesses described her as radiant, golden-haired, graceful, composed. But behind that composure was calculation. She was learning. Quickly, beauty was not for self-expression now. It was a weapon, and Lucrezia was being trained to use it. with precision. Behind closed doors, the marriage became stranger. Reports suggest her father took a disturbing interest in her wedding night. Some whispered he demanded details. Others claimed he was present. We may never know the full truth. But what's undeniable is that Lucrezia's privacy, her dignity, and her innocence were no longer hers. She belonged to him, and he used her, as only the powerful can. As property, wrapped in lace, as leverage. With a heartbeat, the Pope had risen, but Lucrezia had fallen. The marriage to Giovanni Sforza lasted 3 years. 3 years of public alliance. 3 years of private suspicion. 3 years of waiting for political winds to shift. And when they did, so did Lucrezia's value. The alliance no longer served the Borgias. Giovanni had outlived his usefulness. But a pope cannot simply discard a son-in-law. So they crafted a legal fiction. The marriage, they claimed, had never been consummated. A girl married at 13, 3 years in the same household, and suddenly she was declared untouched. To prove the claim, midwives were summoned. They examined Lucrezia's body for signs of virginity, not in private, but for official record. Her physical state became a tool of diplomacy, her most intimate truth, reduced to legal paperwork. Giovanni fought back. He accused the Pope, his own father-in-law, of demanding the annulment so he could continue an incestuous relationship with Lucrezia. The accusation was explosive. But in Renaissance Rome, not unbelievable. The papal court was already drenched in scandal, and the Borgia name carried so much filth that even wild rumors felt plausible. Whether Giovanni lied in anger or told an unbearable truth, history will never confirm. But the damage was done. Lucrezia, just 16, was publicly dissected, morally questioned, and politically erased. The church, that claimed to guard her soul, used her body as a shield, as a pawn, as proof. She wasn't divorced. She was annulled, as if none of it had ever happened. Not the wedding, not the years, not the pain. It was her first true lesson in papal politics. Even memory can be rewritten. Even dignity can be sacrificed. Even truth can be bought. If Rodrigo Borgia was lust and ambition, Cesare Borgia was something darker, brilliant, charismatic, and ruthless beyond measure. While the father bought his way to power, the son carved his name in blood. He had once been a cardinal, but gave up the robes of the church for armor, steel, and absolute control. And Lucrezia was caught between them. If her father used her, Cesare claimed her, not in open words, but in gestures, in eyes that followed too closely, in jealous fits of rage. Whenever another man approached her, he watched over her, not like a brother, but like a man guarding his possession. Some said it was protection. Others called it obsession. When her annulment was finalized, Cesare's presence around her intensified. He chose where she went, who she spoke to, even how she dressed. She was no longer a daughter used for diplomacy, but a sister imprisoned by desire. Those closest to the family whispered about midnight visits, rooms guarded, servants dismissed. No one dared confront him, not even the Pope. Cesare had already killed once, to protect family secrets. His own brother, Giovanni, murdered in the Tiber, his body found with stab wounds and a slit throat. Rumors swirled that Cesare was behind it, and if he could murder his brother, what would stop him from controlling his sister? The walls around Lucrezia grew smaller. She had escaped one husband, only to be locked in a palace, with a brother whose love felt more like captivity. Every smile she gave was measured, every movement rehearsed. She lived under surveillance, not from enemies, but from her own blood. And the more she tried to live freely, the tighter Cesare's grip became. Possession, not protection. control, not care. To the world, they were siblings of a powerful house. Behind closed doors, the dynamic was far more terrifying. Lucrezia Borgia wasn't surrounded by enemies. She was devoured by her family. At 17, Lucrezia Borgia married Alfonso of Aragon. Not for power, but for once something closer to love. He was young, handsome, gentle in a world of wolves. Witnesses spoke of tenderness between them, quiet walks, shared laughter, moments too small for politics, but large enough to matter. They had a son, Rodrigo, named for her father, perhaps out of strategy, perhaps out of habit, but in that child, Lucrezia found something real. For the first time, she seemed to believe she could build a life of her own, not as a pawn, but as a woman. But love is dangerous. In a family that trades in control, Cesare watched. Their father calculated, and both saw Alfonso as a threat, not for what he did, but for what he meant. He gave Lucrezia hope, and in the Borgia world, hope was treason. In 1500, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. A brutal ambush. Stab wounds tore through his chest, but he survived it. Barely. Lucrezia became his nurse. She refused to leave his side. She prepared his food. She guarded his chamber. But poison wasn't the only weapon. Cesare came and made his intentions clear. What was not done at lunch, he said, would be done at dinner. That night, men entered Alfonso's room. Lucrezia and her sister-in-law were dragged away, and in the silence that followed, Alfonso was strangled in his bed. The official cause of death, fever. But everyone knew. Lucrezia knew. She had tried to save him. But in the end, even her love couldn't protect him. She cried over his body, a rare public crack, in her carefully crafted mask. The girl who had believed was gone. In her place stood someone colder, emptier, aware that nothing, not love, not loyalty, not even motherhood, was safe. That night, something inside her shattered for good. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost the illusion that she could ever be free. Alfonso's murder was not just a killing. It was a message. Even your happiness belongs to us. After Alfonso's murder, the whispers grew louder, not about politics, but about Lucrezia and the men closest to her. The word that began to circle again and again was incest. People had long questioned the bond between Lucrezia and her father, and between Lucrezia and Cesare. But now, the rumors took on new weight. They whispered of jealousy, of obsession, of midnight visits to papal chambers, with doors closed, and servants dismissed. And then came the child. A mysterious infant appeared in the Borgia household. A boy. His name Giovanni. But his origin was shrouded in contradiction. Two separate papal bulls claimed to clarify the child's parentage. One named Pope Alexander VI as the father, the other named Cesare. Neither document said anything about the mother. And that silence, that deliberate silence, spoke louder than any confession. Was the child Lucrezia's? If so, was he born from violence? From shame? From something darker? No one dared ask. No one dared answer. Giovanni was raised with titles, but no clarity. Even centuries later, historians debate the truth. And Lucrezia never spoke of him. Not in public, not in private. It was as if the child existed in a locked chamber of her past, never acknowledged, never explained. Her silence became its own kind of testimony. Whether the rumors were true or not, no longer mattered. They had taken root. She was now a symbol, not of evil, but of corruption so deep that even family ties were no longer sacred. She became a myth, wrapped in shame and scandal, not because of what she said, but because of what she never denied. In the world of the Borgias, truth didn't matter, only what people could be made to believe. And by then, they believed everything. At 21, Lucrezia Borgia entered her third marriage, to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. But this union was different. It wasn't arranged in a fever of papal ambition. It was a negotiation. And Lucrezia, by now, had learned how to negotiate. She demanded terms. A proper dowry. A position of dignity. And space. Space from Rome. Space from her family. Space to breathe. The court of Ferrara was skeptical. They knew her name. They knew the rumors. They expected a seductress. A manipulator. A scandal made flesh. But what arrived instead was a woman shaped by survival. Lucrezia didn't try to erase her past. She simply refused to be defined by it. In Ferrara, she reinvented herself. She became a patron of the arts. Surrounded by poets, painters, philosophers, she governed in her husband's absence, proving not just capable, but exceptional. She studied languages, read philosophy, wrote letters that revealed a sharp, layered intellect. Her court became one of the most refined in Italy, a center of culture, led by a woman once seen as poisoned. She hadn't escaped the past, but for the first time, she was building something of her own. Alfonso d'Este, at first reluctant, grew to respect her. He came to see, not the scandal, but the strategist. Together they had children. Some lived, some didn't. And in every loss, Lucrezia carried herself with quiet endurance. There were no grand speeches, no public confessions, only a woman who had known humiliation, violence, and manipulation, now choosing what kind of life she would shape from the ashes. Ferrara didn't erase her trauma, but it gave her room to be something other than a pawn. Here, she wasn't just the daughter of a corrupt pope, or the sister of a killer. She was a duchess, a ruler, a survivor, and for the first time, she was her own. In 1503, Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, died suddenly. The official cause, fever, but whispers suggested poison, perhaps even by his own hand. He had lived by corruption, and died surrounded by it. Lucrezia's response was not what the world expected. No weeping, no mourning parade, only silence. Witnesses recalled, a calm acknowledgement, and a swift focus on securing her position in Ferrara. The death of the man who gave her life and stole her innocence was met with cold strategy. Perhaps that was her final judgment. She did not curse him. She did not praise him. She simply moved on. Without the Pope, the Borgia Empire began to collapse. Enemies circled, and Cesare, the untouchable son, the shadow behind the throne, was no longer protected. He had made too many enemies, shed too much blood, burned too many bridges. Without papal power shielding him, he was arrested, imprisoned, and exiled. Eventually he died, in a petty skirmish in Spain. Far from the halls of power, he once ruled with terror. Lucrezia's reaction to her brother's death was more complex. She wore mourning clothes, longer than custom demanded. Some say it was real grief. Others say it was image control. Perhaps she felt both. Grief for the brother, who had once protected her, even as he possessed her, and relief that the final chain around her life was broken. The Borgia name still held weight, but its dominion was over. Rodrigo was dead. Cesare had fallen, and Lucrezia, the last survivor of their ambition, stood not in mourning, but in survival. Power had abandoned her, and somehow, she had endured. Ferrara became Lucrezia's refuge, but not her escape. She built a court of elegance, surrounding herself with poets, artists, philosophers. She read widely, wrote letters full of wit and insight, and carried herself with quiet nobility. Visitors to Ferrara expected scandal. What they found was a woman transformed, not purified, but dignified. She had learned to lead, to inspire, to endure. Under her guidance, the court flourished. And yet, behind the culture and ceremony, pain lingered. Lucrezia bore at least 11 pregnancies. Most ended in loss, miscarriages, stillbirths, infants who lived only days. Her body had been a battlefield since childhood, and now it bore the cost. Each loss carved another wound that no robe or title could cover. She rarely spoke of it, but her letters changed. They grew quieter, more contemplative, as if the strength she projected outward was being paid for in silence. Her children, the ones who lived it, became her redemption. And her fear. She watched them closely, searching for signs of the past. Would the corruption of the Borgias pass through blood? Could she protect them from the ghosts that shaped her? She tried, fiercely. Motherhood became her sanctuary, and her final act of resistance. To love, without agenda. To protect, without politics. To raise children, as something more than bargaining chips. She also became a spiritual figure, not in the church's image, but in her own. Not pious, but thoughtful. Not self-righteous, but searching. Her letters to scholars reveal a woman of layered intelligence. She spoke of art, power, love, loss, but rarely of her past. That silence was its own monument, a locked chamber. No one could enter, not because she was hiding, but because the wounds ran too deep to explain. Lucrezia Borgia, the girl once traded like currency, had become something unexpected. A ruler, a patron, a woman, flawed, but human, haunted, but alive. In 1519, Lucrezia Borgia became pregnant. For the final time, she was 39, older than most women, survived childbirth in that era, and her body was exhausted. Years of pregnancy, miscarriage, grief, and political performance had taken their toll. This pregnancy was no different. She grew weak early. Doctors were summoned. Prayers were whispered, but no miracle came. She gave birth to a daughter. The child lived only a few hours. Lucrezia followed days later. The official cause, puerperal fever. A common death. For an uncommon woman, her final moments were quiet. There was no spectacle, no dramatic collapse. She made arrangements for her surviving children, settled her affairs with quiet precision, received last rites from priests of a different church than the one her father once ruled. Witnesses said she faced death with calm acceptance, not resignation, but understanding, as if she had known all along that her life would not be long, only intense. No long speeches, no recorded last words, just a soft fading from a world that had rarely shown her mercy. Ferrara mourned her, not as a scandal, not as a Borgia, but as a duchess, a mother, a woman who had led with grace and governed with intelligence. She was buried with honor, a simple stone, a quiet resting place. And yet, even in death, the legends continued. The seductress, the poisoner, the puppet of popes and princes. But those who knew her, truly knew her, spoke of something else. Of kindness in private moments, of strength during plague and loss, of long silences, and eyes that had seen too much. Lucrezia Borgia did not die in disgrace. She died as she had lived for most of her adult life, not as a symbol, not as a scandal, but as a survivor who finally ran out of strength. History rarely records women fairly, especially women surrounded by power and scandal. Lucrezia Borgia became a myth long before she was a memory. For centuries, she was cast as a villain, the femme fatale, the poisoner, the seductress, with a hollow ring filled with death. She was remembered not as a person, but as a symbol of everything corrupt about the Renaissance. But what do the facts tell us? No credible evidence exists that Lucrezia Borgia ever murdered anyone. Not one poisoning can be traced to her hand, not one proven betrayal to her name. The image of the beautiful killer was crafted, not discovered, a creation of political enemies, of jealous rivals, and of later romantic writers who found it easier to believe in a monster than in a broken girl trying to survive. The real Lucrezia was something far more complicated. A daughter, used as a pawn. A wife, traded for alliances. A sister, controlled by obsession. A mother, who buried child after child and kept going. She governed Ferrara with intelligence, patronized artists and philosophers, carved out meaning from a life that had never truly been her own. The rumors of incest, impossible to prove or disprove it, say more about the Borgia family's reputation than about Lucrezia herself. And yet, they stuck, because scandal sells, and shame, especially when aimed at women, tends to linger longer than truth. The real horror of Lucrezia's story is not what she did, it's what was done to her. Emotionally, psychologically, perhaps physically, she was molded, groomed, positioned, and discarded by the very people meant to love her. And when she tried to reclaim herself, they wrote her legacy for her. A legacy built on suspicion, not evidence, on slander, not testimony, on fantasy, not fact. Modern historians have begun to correct the record. But even now, the myth persists, because it's easier to digest a cautionary tale than a complex woman trapped in a brutal age. Lucrezia Borgia was not a symbol of evil. She was a mirror reflecting the corruption, misogyny, and moral decay of the world around her. And when we judge her, we must ask, are we judging the truth, or just repeating the lies? Lucrezia Borgia's life was not a cautionary tale. It was a case study in what power does to the powerless. She was born into one of the most corrupt institutions in human history, raised by men who confused control with love, trained to survive in a world that mistook obedience for virtue. Her tragedy was not in what she became, but in what she was never allowed to be. She was used, blamed, erased, and then rewritten into a caricature. But behind the myth was a human being, intelligent, sensitive, resilient. She survived what should have destroyed her. She adapted to systems designed to break her. She found fragments of peace in art, in motherhood, in small acts of self-possession that history rarely honors. Was she complicit? Perhaps. How could she not be? No one escapes entirely clean from a world built on exploitation. But complicity born of survival is not the same as guilt. She did what she had to do because no one gave her choices. The institutions that crushed her, the church, the family, the state, are the true architects of this horror. And yet, she lived. She ruled. She mattered. She carved space for herself in a world that left women no room. And when she died, she left behind not a legacy of evil, but a question. What happens to women who are never allowed to be just human? History misremembered her, turned her into a warning, a witch, a weapon. But the truth is quieter, darker, more ordinary. She was not a monster. She was a mirror, and we still haven't looked long enough to see what's really staring back.